you ever suspected that this world is not what it seems?
Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain?
Something strange?
Something extraordinary?
If not, do you wish you had?
Do you long to experience that which lies beyond the bounds of the mundane world?
Hidden somewhere just beyond the limits of our senses.
If so, then join us as we take you on a journey
that blurs the lines between the normal and the paranormal. Welcome to Paranormalcy. From ancient accounts of indigenous peoples of the world, all the way to congressional hearings as recent as 2023, something has been moving through our airspace with a grace and ease that boggles the mind, inspires imagination, and defies all known scientific principles. From stone canoes floating through the air above Native American tribes, to golden dragons delivering emperors to the ancient Chinese from the sky, Vimanas patrolling ancient India piloted by Hindu gods and goddesses, strange airships looming over people's houses in the 1800s, flying saucers, triangles, bell-shaped objects, tic-tacs, and countless other shapes, all illuminated, all defying gravity, and all performing maneuvers indicative of a technology almost indistinguishable from magic. UFOs, UAPs, call them what you will. However, if there's one thing for certain, it's that something very strange is happening in the skies over Earth. And, apparently, that something has been going on for a very, very long time. Delving into this topic, especially for many doing it now for the first time in light of recent events, opens up a Pandora's box. A veritable deluge of information emerges from a seemingly never-ending rabbit hole. Some fact, some fiction, some a mix of both. How are we to know what is really going on? What does any of this mean for humanity, for our past, for our future? There's simply too much to cover in one episode, and there are people who have dedicated their entire lives to studying this and still hardly do it justice. That being said, this will be the first in a series on this topic, beginning with some history, my own close encounter, and an introduction into theories regarding the nature of these phenomenon and the subsequent cover-up.
Unidentified anomalous phenomenon, defined as any perceived aerial phenomenon that cannot be immediately identified or explained, is used to describe what in the past were referred to as UFOs. This term was coined by NASA, which began using it in the early 2020s in order to put distance between the phenomenon itself and conspiracy theories that these unidentified craft may be alien in origin. And we're going to have to take an aside here to discuss this because I know that some people are very much in favor of using this term legally. People like David Grush have observed that utilizing terms like UAP in legislation that's intended to bring about UFO disclosure is necessary because it closes loopholes that may be used to sidestep proposed requirements to disclose where this technology comes from. And I agree that the legal utility of this term is necessary. That being said, my objection, and what I will continue to disparage, is that a government agency has redefined a phenomena which is of deep interest to the military, a division of the government. And the media, deeply enmeshed with the government, has taken that redefined term and utilized it alongside the term conspiracy theory, which is a term popularly used by the CIA to discredit people with extremely valid questions. And the government and their affiliates are now using that redefined, non-legal term to disparage the civilian public for asking the same questions that the government is asking in secret. It's a take. And it's not one that I think is going to age especially well when people start looking at how secretive the government is with their black budget projects. The CIA already estimates that over half of the UFOs reported in the 50s and 60s were actually the U-2 and the SR-71 Blackbird. And taking into consideration the stealth aircraft of the 80s and 90s that the public is aware of, like the RQ-3 Darkstar, the F-117 Nighthawk, and the B-2 Spirit, it's not difficult to imagine why. These aircraft look like what we imagine UFOs might look like, and they're capable of things that normal aircraft aren't. And if you weren't familiar with them, you might think they were UFOs too. And for a company like Lockheed, which developed all of the aircraft that I mentioned except for the B-2, that's a really precarious situation to be put into. Since World War II, their primary customer has been various governments. They were good at producing those types of products, and they had the infrastructure to get better at it. and they were able to design and build revolutionary aircraft in as little as 3.5 months. Before the end of the war, they had founded their Skunk Works program, which was conducting R&D within classified Air Force manufacturing plants under contract. Higher-up members of the government were giving them information that wasn't even being requested in official contracts, and they developed several components based on handshake deals with nothing in writing. By 1955, they were testing at Area 51, and by the Cold War, the CIA had set up false businesses within the Soviet Union to obtain titanium needed for this private company to manufacture secret airplanes for them with above top-secret technology. They literally still manufacture at a classified Air Force plant to this very day. Their later offerings included the officially cancelled Cormorant and the RQ-170 Sentinel. And to be clear, there are projects like this in a lot of major aerospace companies. Consider for a moment the possibility that even 1% of this technology was reverse engineered from a crashed or captured extraterrestrial vehicle. For these companies, literally billions of dollars rest on keeping that 1% of technology secret, and it's a small price to pay to discredit people by saying UFOs aren't real, it's ball lightning, it's a weather balloon, it's a lenticular cloud, it's a star. And in some cases that may actually be true, so there is a legitimate utility to this. Being able to identify a lenticular cloud, for instance, means that we can identify when something isn't a lenticular cloud. What they do when they find evidence of something that isn't a lenticular cloud is what I'm judging them on. What happens when we don't have an explanation? You would think that, being a science organization, an object or a phenomenon would be studied, but that's not what we see. It's ignored. NASA routinely edits its photographs. Some of this is necessary, but some of it isn't. Google, which is deeply enmeshed with the government and receives a lot of money from them, routinely edits its Earth imagery. Some of it is necessary, but some of it isn't. And when they miss things, this is what we see. So what exactly is going on here, and how long has it been happening? The Pushpaka Vimana that resembles the sun and belongs to my brother was brought by the powerful Ravana, that aerial and excellent Vimana going everywhere at will, that chariot resembling a bright cloud in the sky. And the king got in, and the excellent chariot at the command of the Raghira rose up into the higher atmosphere. The appearance of the wheels and their construction was like gleaming jasper, and all 4 wheels looked alike. Their structure was like a wheel within a wheel. When they moved, they would go in any of the 4 directions they faced without turning as they moved. Their rims were high and awesome, and the rims of all 4 wheels were full of eyes all around. When the living beings moved, the wheels beside them moved. When the living beings rose up from the ground, the wheels rose up too. Wherever the spirit would go, they would go, and the wheels would rise up beside them because the spirit of the living being was in the wheel. Flying machines in holy books is a fairly well-covered topic. I've chosen the most obvious examples for the introduction to this section. The Vimanas, or flying machines that carried the gods in Hinduism, and the Wheel of Ezekiel from the Bible. And some people may feel as though this association cheapens a religion, but that's certainly not my intention. I love religion. I also love anthropology. And we do have examples of uncontacted peoples altering their religion after seeing regular human beings in flying machines. They're called cargo cults, and they've been observed since the 1880s, but became widely known after World War II, when native populations of Melanesian islands observed the Japanese and American militaries bringing goods and supplies through the island on their way to their destinations. These people didn't abandon their beliefs. Instead, they began to emulate these military personnel in hopes that the cargo would return. They slashed the jungle, built airstrips, fashioned effigies of control towers and airplanes, wore wooden headphones, and ran drills with carved or salvaged rifles. And they didn't recognize that these people were human soldiers. They deified them, and some still do to this day. They became not only gods, but ancestor gods, even though they were clearly not of the same racial background as the Melanesians. So is it all that difficult to believe that we might have done the same thing after seeing unbelievably technologically advanced beings? That we didn't deify them, enmesh them with our own myths, and emulate them? That we didn't explain their technology or behavior in the best way that we could within the scope of our own understanding? That we didn't refer to them as flying chariots or wheels within wheels, or that we didn't refer to a weapon that creates a fireball and flashing light, which makes the earth and ocean tremble, prevents anything from growing ever again where it's set off, destroys the climate, and prevents rainfall for 37 trillion years as a Brahmastra, and say that it's a weapon of the gods? Or that in the Book of Enoch, when the Watchers came down to Earth and instructed humans in metalworking, astronomy, and meteorology, that it was referred to as sorcery. The Yellow Emperor arrived in China on a dragon, and when it was time for him to leave, he departed into the sky on a dragon. Then there's Lord Pakal's sarcophagus lid, and the Tuatha De Danann of Ireland descending from the sky. They landed on mountains and burned their ships so they couldn't return. Gods arriving in the clouds is fairly common. It appears in Exodus, Revelation, Daniel, Numbers, Ezekiel, Psalms, Deuteronomy, Nahum, and Mark. It even appears in the Quran. A stele erected by Thutmose III in 1450 BC describes a star as coming down to set fire to Thutmose's adversaries, and Livy describes phantom ships gleaming in the sky in the 200s BC. They're described by Pliny the Elder, Plutarch, Flavius Josephus, and Cassius Dio as being observed during the eras of the Roman Republic and Empire. Moving forward in history, we have the Annunciation with St. Emitius, where we see God as a being in the clouds, the Madonna with St. Giovannino, the Baptism of Christ, this painting at the Viscoy Decani Monastery in Kosovo, and the celestial phenomena over Nuremberg, which was witnessed in 1561 and Basel in 1566. These sightings aren't limited to hundreds of years ago either. Let's move into more modern times. In the 1880s, astronomer Jose Bonilla documented approximately 450 unidentified objects transiting the sun. This was explained in 2011 as comet fragments, but the reports from that year do not indicate anything strange about the Parasid meteor shower which happened soon after the observations. In fact, one report literally says that the display cannot be reckoned as a fine one by any means. Reports of the Leonid meteor shower didn't indicate anything strange either, and other observatories didn't see this display despite being relatively close to where Bonilla made his observations. It's also been explained as high-flying geese, insects, or dust, which seems like a strange thing for a literal astronomer who had been studying celestial photography at the Paris Astronomical Observatory for the better part of a decade to misidentify. So what happened? There was a fleet of mystery airships which as many as 100,000 people claim to have seen flying over the United States for a period of 2 years in the 1890s. Similar sightings had happened in previous decades, but the 1890s wave was the most well documented as it was followed by newspapers across the country. Not only were these airships headed east, but their occupants reportedly spoke to people at several points in their journey. It was difficult to communicate with them. Some claimed to have learned English as a second language, and some reportedly only made strange noises, but they indicated the sky when they were asked where they came from. A physician claimed to have been abducted at gunpoint in order to care for the captain of one of these vessels who had fallen ill. A newspaper claimed that one of the crafts had crashed and that the investigators had discovered a being who was not an inhabitant of this world among the wreckage. There was strange writing and a metal that they didn't recognize within it as well. This is widely dismissed as a hoax now, but the airships were all seen in the same radius, for example an 80-mile radius around Sacramento, California on the same day, or a 135-mile radius around Alma, Michigan on the same day before moving. If they were a hoax, why weren't people all over saying that they had seen them? Why were they traveling, stopping, and then moving again and people were just reporting it? There seems to be a lot of agreement on the nature of these craft and where they were, and only after the fact did people reportedly admit that they made up the stories. But you really have to wonder when so many points line up in an era where it was so difficult for people to communicate over that distance. In 1917, tens of thousands of people witnessed the miracle of Fatima. These people were gathered because 3 children had been visited by an apparition that they believed to be the Virgin Mary, and they had been told that she would appear on the date and perform a miracle so that all may believe. On the stated date, the sun appeared, surrounded with a scarlet flame, aureoled in yellow and deep purple, and seemed to have an exceedingly swift and whirling movement, at times appearing to be approaching the earth. The sun appeared gray, silver, blue, and took on all the colors of the rainbow, and sent forth multicolored flashes of light. After an extensive investigation and review of testimony from believers, reporters, and even government officials, the church declared this a miracle in 1930 and allowed for the cult of Our Lady of Fatima within the church. They were approved by Pope Pius XII in 1940, who claimed to have witnessed the miracle himself. At that same time, 3 things were happening. 1, the Germans, reportedly at the direction of various occult-affiliated secret societies such as the Vril and Thule societies, who were in turn acting on information that they had received from entities that they had met on the astral plane, were developing Der Glocke, a bell-shaped craft which was capable of levitation and was supposedly heavily irradiated. 2. In America, the Los Angeles air raid, during which a total blackout was ordered and 50 caliber anti-aircraft machine guns were fired towards the Pacific Ocean for nearly an hour after seeing unidentified objects, both visually and on radar, took place. This was attributed to a false alarm. And 3. In Europe, Allied pilots were contending with what would be termed as Foo Fighters. Foo Fighters were unidentified flying objects which were originally believed by Americans to be Messerschmitt interceptors, except that they were operating at night, something that Messerschmitts weren't capable of. These objects, described as glowing balls of red, orange, or white light, would follow American aircraft at night, pulling maneuvers which were supposed to be impossible and demonstrating that they were unable to be outmaneuvered or shot down. Then they would disappear without a trace. They would even join formations and fly along with them. These sightings were reported by the British, Polish, Germans, Japanese, Americans, and Italians. They were seen over the Indian Ocean, over France, in Belgium, the Netherlands, Britain, and over the Pacific Ocean. A U.S. Senator, Ted Stevens, is on record as encountering them when he was a fighter pilot. Quote, "I was flying and there was an object next to me. I couldn't get rid of it. I slowed up, it was there. I sped up, it was there. I would dive, it would be there. I called, nothing on radar." After the war, the Robertson Panel was formed at the recommendation of the Intelligence Advisory Committee, after the newly formed CIA reviewed the Air Force's Project Blue Book. The Robertson Panel's opinion was that UFOs were not piloted by extraterrestrial intelligences, but that interest in them resulting in reports to our defense systems could result in overwhelming those systems at critical times. The conclusion was that a public education campaign should be taken to reduce public interest in the subject, and UFO groups should be monitored. They made the following recommendations. The Director of Central Intelligence should be empowered to institute through the appropriate agencies, either within or without the government, the investigation and research necessary to solve the problem of instant positive identification of unidentified flying objects. And the CIA develop and recommend for adoption by the National Security Council a policy of public information which will minimize the risk of panic. Soon after these recommendations were made, and in response to UFO sightings at Los Alamos and Oak Ridge, along with unexplainable spikes in the cosmic background radiation, they made these additional recommendations. That the Director of Central Intelligence shall formulate and carry out a program of intelligence and research activities as required to solve the problem of instant positive identification of unidentified flying objects. Upon call of the Director of Central Intelligence, government departments and agencies shall provide assistance in this program of intelligence and research to the extent of their capacity, and that the Director of Central Intelligence shall avoid duplication of activities presently directed towards the solution of this problem. The panel, which contained Frederick Durant, a CIA officer, and J. Allen Hynek, formerly a debunker of UFO Phenomenon with the Air Force and Project Blue Book, agreed. I'll let you make of that one what you will. Between the year 1900 and the end of the Second World War, there were 6 major UFO events. In the 45 years after the war ended, there were 60. That's Wikipedia alone. I'm sure that I could have dug up other events, but this episode has already taken me 2 months to write, and I have to draw the line somewhere. This includes literally thousands of reports all over Europe in the year following the war, and over 800 flying saucers reported on the west coast of the United States in 1947 alone. This could be attributed to the world getting smaller and its citizens being more interested in these flying saucers. Reports that might not have been anything more than local news 200 years ago are now easily accessible all over the world. But it might not be. Before the war, people saw UFOs all over the place, sure, but after it ended, the concern was that they were appearing near American military installations, and that the military was engaging them and consistently being outmaneuvered. Just 2 years after the war, a flying saucer would crash in Roswell, New Mexico. In 1948, a C-47 was tailed by a green ball of fire. A pilot died after attempting to tail a UFO in a P-51 and blacking out at 25,000 feet, and another P-51 engaged in a 400-mile-an-hour dogfight over Fargo, North Dakota. They showed up at Oak Ridge and Los Alamos, Edwards Air Force Base, Kirkland, and even in low Earth orbit during the Gemini 4 mission. They were sighted numerous times by civilian aircraft, flying in formation over American cities and above American highways. People were abducted, most notably Betty and Barney Hill. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police investigated a large illuminated object that reportedly crashed into a harbor in 1967. The Department of National Defense did an underwater search and found nothing. In 1969, the Finnish Air Force scrambled a fighter jet to investigate 7 of them, which were all able to outrun him. Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, and John Lennon all saw them. While meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev, Reagan even asked if Gorbachev would come to our aid if we were attacked by someone from outer space. Gorbachev replied, "No doubt about it." Reagan replied, "Us too." This sentiment was not kept to himself either. During a speech, Reagan would later say, "Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bond. I occasionally think of how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world." Why was Reagan thinking so much about alien threats? Whatever this technology is, it is of great interest to us, great enough that the government would go to extensive lengths to avoid a public panic about it, and that governments all over the world would dispatch fighters and try to shoot it down. Great enough that the Soviets and the Americans would band together against it. That in and of itself poses a lot of questions about their origins, what they are, and why the government is trying so hard to disprove all of the events as hoaxes and conspiracy theories. But there's something that we've been dancing around for this entire episode, and I think it's the most pertinent question of all. Who's driving them?
For my entire life, I've been interested in outer space. When I was a child, I used to sit in front of my parents' old Zenith tube TV and watch every single space shuttle launch live on television. It wasn't long before the idea of UFOs piqued my interest. It seemed only inevitable. I absorbed every bit of material I could on the topic. Books, movies, TVs, websites. After years of wonder, I too, one day, had a close encounter of my own. This happened in the summer of 2007, while staying at our family's usual vacation spot at Cape Cod. Me, my brother, my cousin, and a girl I was dating at the time were all walking along the beach at night. Out on the coast, there's little light pollution, and the stars in Milky Way are clearly visible and breathtakingly beautiful. We would often go out at night just to enjoy this display. As we were all chatting, my cousin and I noticed a bright light across the bay. It was too low and too bright to be a star, and yet it was too high up to be a building or radio tower. It didn't blink and it wasn't moving, so the options of what it could be perplexed us. As we watched, the light suddenly went out, only to appear slightly to the right moments later. Over the course of the next few minutes, this light periodically disappeared and reappeared slightly further from where it was. While curious, we couldn't really make heads or tails of it, so we returned to the conversation the others were having and paid it no further mind. We continued chatting, and as I faced the three of them, a few things happened all at once. Everyone stopped talking and immediately stared at the sky behind me with their mouths agape. At that exact moment, the entire area around us lit up as bright as day. I could feel a heat on the back of my neck from something, and I turned around to see what had petrified my companions, and I too was instantly stunned. No more than 100 feet above our heads was hovering an orb of light. And to call it that is to do a grave injustice to what we were actually witnessing. This light was like nothing I've ever seen before. Every light has its own quality that our eyes can instantly recognize, whether it's an incandescent bulb, a neon light, an LED, a candle flame. They all have their own unique and recognizable characteristics, but this light was like no other. It had a quality unique unto itself. It was bright enough to illuminate the surrounding area comparable to the noontime sun, yet it didn't hurt to look directly at it. It glowed in such a way as to almost feel alive. This orb somehow felt intelligent and appeared almost bioluminescent. We stared transfixed as it hung there motionless, without a slightest sound. After several seconds of stunned silence, I pointed my finger up at it and shouted, "What is that?" After repeating this question no more than 3 times, the orb moved. All in one motion, it glided overhead effortlessly and faded out. It wasn't as if it simply got dimmer. The only way I could really describe it is that it was as if it wrapped the darkness of space around itself like a blanket. Imagine taking a light bulb and slowly immersing it in black paint. That's the closest I can come to describe it, really. Once fully cloaked, its silhouette could still be faintly seen in the sky above us. Suddenly, that dark shadow that had once been an orb of light did a quick loop and shot out across the bay. Once there, it returned to its task of lighting up in one location, disappearing, lighting up in another. It continued on this way all night. Eventually there were 2 of them, then 3. While it never came back that close again after that, I can't help but feel like I scared it away somehow by breaking the peace of the moment with my outburst. Maybe if we had remained calm, communication would have occurred. Perhaps it did later that night, either in a dream forgotten or a memory repressed. I still don't know. In subsequent years, we would go back to that beach looking for our friendly ball in the sky. As fate would have it, it wouldn't be the last time I witnessed something unexplainable on that beach. We've returned to that same spot each year, and every year we encounter something, albeit not nearly as close or as intense as that first night. Maybe since making their presence known in such an obvious way, perhaps all that was needed was a gentle reminder that they were still there, watching and waiting. All of this is detailed in my book, along with every other strange paranormal experience I've had, for those who are curious. Suffice to say, this encounter was life-changing, one that is vividly remembered and still talked about by those who witnessed it to this day. With such a wide variety of reports, it seems obvious that, leaving aside the hoaxes, there are a multitude of things happening in our skies. One can assume that some of these craft, at least the ones that could obviously be identified as craft, are man-made. There are plenty of stories of crashed saucers being recovered by government or military agents in countries all over the world, most notably Roswell in 1947. Each of these incidents deserve an entire episode, if not an entire book, and many of them have both. Assuming that this happened at least once, and all evidence suggests that it has, it stands to reason that those who recovered such craft have been working diligently trying to reverse engineer the recovered wreckage. While this used to be mere speculation with eyewitness testimony, David Grush, a United States Air Force officer and former U.S. intelligence official, has sworn testimony before Congress stating this as fact. He is only the first in a series of whistleblowers to step forward in an official capacity, and certainly won't be the last. This fact alone is astounding to me. It used to be that people who believed this type of stuff were met with ridicule and laughter. Documentaries on TV back in the 80s and 90s would paint witnesses as kooks and conspiracy theorists. They would lay out all the stories only to debunk them at the end. Any scientist or journalist who dared take the phenomenon seriously had their reputations ruined and their careers destroyed. What changed? It's hard not to think of deep-level conspiracies while dealing with this subject. Media spin, official denial, government cover-ups are all par for the course here. There are also figures like Richard Doty, who were trained by intelligence agencies to embed within the UFO community, spread lies, and muddy the waters as a way to throw serious researchers off the trail and outright discredit the entire movement. The fact that he has come out and admitted as much, as depicted in the movie Mirage Men, and is still involved in the community is disconcerting to say the least. How can he be trusted? How can anyone be trusted? Some of the leading researchers in MUFON are part of the Rockefeller Initiative, a name of which should raise some alarm bells among conspiracy theorists. And we'll get into this in later episodes. Not too long ago, Bob Lazar made a comeback on the UFO disclosure circuit with his interview on Joe Rogan's podcast. Bob claims that these craft are powered by something referred to as Element 115, which, to the excitement of many, turned out to be discovered after the fact. It's little surprise that it did, however, since it's simply just another element already predicted to exist among many others. It was bound to be found eventually. And there are other people who go into more scientific detail about all of this. However, the point I'm getting at is what is really the crux of the issue here. When it comes to UFOs, there are two main factors, the facts of which would disrupt the power structure of the planet irrevocably. Factor number one is, how do they fly? Number two is, how are they powered? Both of these questions have a long history behind them, a history of invention, deception, thievery, and even bloodshed. That history is again worthy of its own episode and series. However, for those interested, I'll refer you to Dr. Stephen Greer's latest movie, The Lost Century. In it, he carefully illustrates the long tradition of free energy and anti-gravity technology suppression. For mainstream science and engineering, the only energy one can get out of a system is the energy put into it. It merely changes form. Whether it's from coal, gasoline, wind, water, thermonuclear reactions, the electricity generated is equal to the energy put in. It's the law of thermodynamics. However, that is not the case for these suppressed technologies. The types of devices made vary in their design and intensity. Suffice it to say, they all share one thing in common. They all produce more energy than they receive. Devices such as these are known as over-unity devices, some claiming to pull near limitless energy from the void itself. Mainstream science thinks these things are impossible. However, as Dr. Greer and others have shown, many have already achieved this, only to have their patents buried, their devices stolen, or the inventors themselves mysteriously die in the process. The first of these is a man that most ought to be familiar with, a man named Nikola Tesla. His experiments sought to electrify the entire world wirelessly. One would only need a device to receive this power. To those who amassed incredible wealth by controlling the world's energy reserves, they simply could not allow this. J.P. Morgan said it best: if anyone could tap into energy anywhere and for free, how could we meter it? How could he get paid? Tesla unfortunately died in poverty in a hotel room he was living in at the end of his life. His safe was cracked and all of his notes and papers were confiscated by the FBI, never to be seen again. The vast amount of wealth tied into the modern-day energy industry is one of the biggest factors in who controls the planet today. And it therefore stands to reason that those in power would do anything to remain. Whatever is powering these strange craft in our skies, whether ours or others, it surely isn't gasoline or coal. To get any scientists to seriously entertain how such feats are possible, inevitably they will respond that too much energy is required. And while that might be the case using conventional methods, the eyes of multitudes of credible witnesses surely can't be deceiving them. Something is actually going on. Of course, there are those who still jokingly suggest that all UFO witnesses are rednecks drunk on moonshine or other such foolishness. Little do they know, though, that throughout UFO history there have been a multitude of credible witnesses. Police officers, military pilots, astronauts, politicians, they've all claimed to have sightings of their own. And not just alone, mind you, but in groups as well, all together witnessing the same thing. At this point, science would have an easier time proving that these craft are real, as opposed to trying to prove some mass hysteria or some other flaccid attempt at debunking. Project Blue Book, some of you might be familiar with, was established by the U.S. Air Force as a means to debunk all these sightings officially. And yet, the project's scientific advisor, astronomer J. Allen Hynek, was eventually turned from skeptic to believer. You can only experience this so long before you simply run out of explanations. Not all of them can be debunked. Assuming they are real nuts and bolts craft, something is definitely powering them. If we take Bob Lazar's account of Element 115 and juxtapose it to the long track record of free energy device suppression, it's hard to argue that he, whether knowingly or not, is not just another smokescreen to steer us away from the potential that free energy devices would have to upset the power balance. Upsetting the power balance would be all the more easy if the second aspect of the UFO phenomenon was released to the public: anti-gravity technology. It's now more modernly referred to as anti-gravitics, but that aside, imagine what releasing this technology would mean for the planet. Whomever harnessed it would dominate the skies. Not only the skies, however, since many witnesses claim these craft can seamlessly transition from space to atmosphere, underwater, even into solid rock, with no resistance whatsoever. Not only would they dominate the skies, they could dominate the entire planet. Is this something that can be casually put into the hands of the everyday commuter? Now let's put two and two together. Imagine a weapon harnessing free energy, a device that draws near infinite power from the vacuum. And take that weapon and put it on a platform that can outmaneuver anything currently available to the most technologically advanced nation-state in the world. It's a frightening concept, isn't it? So all this begs the question, though: have they, the ones working on reverse engineering these projects, actually figured it out yet? After years of study and in light of recent events, my head is still spinning with the possibilities. Disclosure is coming one way or another, but just what that disclosure will mean for the planet will undoubtedly be the most significant in our history. I pray with all my heart that we, the people of Earth, come out better for it. It's obvious that the powers that be wish to control this information. Whether they release only part of it, a half-truth, or the entire thing remains to be seen. Free energy would liberate the planet, lift entire countries out of poverty, and reduce pollution to zero, among other blessings one can only fathom. Anti-gravitic craft could unite the world in a way never before seen through transportation, shipping, possibly even take us to the stars. But there is one thing we have yet to cover, something only barely hinted at here. If some of these craft are indeed ours, then who's piloting the rest? Did we invent our own anti-gravitics and zero-point energy devices, or were they reverse engineered? If so, from what? From who? Aliens, angels, demons, ultra-terrestrials, extraterrestrials, time travelers? Join us for our next episode.
Paranormalcy is produced and co-written by Matthew McLurisi and Sarah O'Shea. We produce our own music and our own art. To support our work, please visit our website in the link below, where you can contribute to our crowdfunding, purchase the Paranormalcy book, and enjoy our art and music. We encourage you to reach out to us and share your own paranormal experiences. Our email address can be found on our website and in the link below. We would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening.